I have traveled all the way out to sunny St. George, Utah to test 3 different forks on the market. All 3 of these forks come in at a really nice budget price point, which makes it quite difficult to decide on what fork you want to put on your bike. That's why I'm out here today. I'm going to be putting all 3 forks on the same bike and going and riding the same trail to give you the best feedback that I can. We're going to do this back to back to back and see how it goes. Today we will be testing the RFLOXA fork, the FastAce Gravitee fork, and the KKE Performance 37mm fork. So let's get into it. There's a new brand of suspension on the market, and that is called RFLOXA. Now before I get into riding and reviewing the suspension, there's a couple of things that I want to make clear. This is not my first time riding the suspension. I've spent upwards of 5 to 10 hours breaking in the suspension and getting it ready for this review. I think that's a very important thing to do because you need to make sure that the bike is actually well balanced. You need to make sure you've got the right spring rates for your weight. And a very telltale sign on whether or not you have the right spring rate is if you can feel the compression and rebound adjustments while you're making them. Now I'm not saying you make one click and you can immediately feel it, but I am saying if you move it 3 or 4 clicks, you should be able to notice quite a bit of a difference. If you can't notice that difference, chances are your spring rate is wrong. Another telltale sign that you've got the correct spring rate is that your bike is at the proper sag zone. Now, on all bikes across the industry, that sag zone should be within 30%. Now, there's a lot of different aspects that go into making sure that the bike is balanced, but a lot of that comes down to the feel and your personal riding style. Where you put your weight on the bike makes a huge difference in how the bike behaves, but for the most part, you want to try to stay neutral on it. If you can stay within the neutral zone, then you're going to start to notice things that really make the bike perform a certain way. Like, if your front end is tucking, chances are your rear end might be a little bit too high. And vice versa, if your front end is washing, then your rear end might be a little bit too low. There's a lot of different aspects that go into this. It comes down to how well the bike tracks, it comes down to when you're on the power, how the bike squats. There's a lot of different things when it comes to balancing a bike. So a lot of this you have to really learn, and you have to get a good feel for the bike to understand how it behaves, and suspension is a crucial part to making that work for you. My suspension setup is definitely not going to be the same as somebody else's because I ride totally different. So if you're watching a review on suspension, you should probably make sure that they have taken the proper time to set the bike up for themselves, because that's going to go a long way in how the bike actually feels underneath them, and that way they can give you a solid opinion on what's going on. Now the front fork that I will be testing today is the FCG31 RVP. Now this fork comes in quite a few different variations, but the one I'll be testing today is a 228mm travel 55-pound spring rate. This fork looks a lot like a FastAce, but it does have some nice features to it that kind of set it apart. One of which is the triple clamps. This is probably the most noticeable feature. They've got a 3-bolt system on the lower and a 2-bolt on the upper to add some additional strength and rigidity to the overall chassis. On the top here, you've got a preload adjustment, which is really nice for helping balance out the bike. You've got a rebound adjustment, and then on the lower, you've got both high and low speed compression. Now this is considerably a very budget-friendly setup. The front end comes in at $899. It is not going to compare to what's premium on the market. However, for these lightweight bikes that really ultimately aren't that fast, this is a great setup to make you comfortable. Oh, it's pretty windy, so hopefully the wind isn't too bad for you, but let's go ahead and get into riding it. So like I've said, I've had some time on this suspension prior to this ride, just trying to get it to break in. What I will say is the support that this suspension provides is definitely there. Like, you're definitely riding in a good portion of the stroke throughout the whole thing. But I would say this is much better suspension, at least this fork, for doing jumps, because when you come off of things like that, it absorbs the hit really nicely and it ramps up well. But all of the small chatter on these rocks is a little bit, so, you know, it's just chattery. Like, you definitely feel that chatter underneath it. It's not like a cloud. And that comes down to, I think, the dampening characteristics of it. It's good. It's not terrible, but it feels a little bit over dampened for the square edge hits. And it's nice that you can actually hear the suspension rebound and dampening working underneath you. Like, I can physically hear the noises that it's making
while I'm riding. Like I said, it feels really supportive and great for jumping, coming up short on rollers like that. But for traditional trail riding, which is the majority of what this is, like high-paced desert trail riding, it's just really quite chattery. Like it's hard to fine-tune that. And so when I try to produce harmony between the compression and the rebound, it takes some time to try to really fine-tune and achieve that. But once you got it, it is really comfortable and really easy to predict and manage. Nice that it has the support to go crashing through rollers like that. And it doesn't get out of hand. Now this suspension might not be quite premium, but I am really glad to see these companies really up in their game. I'm really glad to see that you're able to get pretty good suspension at a really good price point, keeping these bikes in the cheaper range.
Today I will be testing the FastAce AHX12RV fork, otherwise known as the Gravitee. Now if you're in the e-moto community, it's very likely that you know the name FastAce. Now this brand has come OEM on a lot of different bikes, and FastAce has kind of reigned supreme over the last couple years for being the best budget fork on the market. Now a lot of competition has come into play over this last year, and they decided they needed to do an update. This fork comes OEM on the Ventus 1 specifically, and that fork comes in at a 50-pound spring rate. FastAce says that this 60-pound spring rate that I will be testing here today is outsprung for my riding weight, which is about 165 when I'm in full gear. However, when it comes to being an aggressive rider, you typically want to go up in the spring rate to be able to support those massive hits and high-speed chatter that you typically have going on. So for a rider like me, this 60-pound spring rate actually fits my riding style really well, and it allows me to be able to go and hit jumps and really enjoy the ride. That 50-pound spring rate is going to be a really good spring rate for somebody that just likes the feeling of a plush bike on a trail. That's a good route to go for you. Now when it comes to the triple clamps on this fork, they are very similar to the original FastAce. However, the actual forks themselves have got some pretty significant changes. It is a slightly longer fork than its predecessor, which allows you to fit a 21-inch wheel better. We've also developed a drop crown for the FastAce series of forks, which allows you to get an extra inch of travel. So if you do want to go to an 1821 setup, that drop crown makes this fork extremely good for keeping your geometry where it needs to be. This FastAce comes with a beautiful black coating on the back. Now typically when you see a black coating on high-end products, that coating is called DLC. I don't think that this coating is DLC. That is a very expensive coating to put on things, and this is still a budget fork. However, the look alone of this is really nice. Now the FastAce Gravitee fork is separate fork function, and on one side of the fork you've got an air bleed and your spring, whereas the other side you've got all of your compression and rebound dampening. Up top here, I've got a rebound knob, and down low, I've got both high and low speed compression. Now the actual travel of this fork is 200 millimeters, which is very standard across the industry. All of these bikes have got 200 millimeters front and rear. You'll see a lot of people turning towards having more suspension travel from 210, 220, even upwards of 240. 240 is a bit excessive for these bikes. 220 seems to work really well. But sticking true to the 200 millimeters that FastAce has done in the past, I don't see any real problem with that, especially not when you add a drop crown and get the clearance that you want and the ability to adjust your geometry to where you need it for your own personal style of riding. The Gravitee fork sits currently at $799. It's been discounted from its original price tag of $899 when it first came out, leaving this fork at a really good price point for what you get out of it. This fork in particular, I think, is right at that 5-hour mark, so it's at a really good place for me to be able to know how it feels. It's at a good place for all of the internals to be working well, and I'm excited to get out there and ride it and show you guys what this thing's all about.
All right, we're out here on the FastAce Gravitee fork. Let's get things started with a couple of hits and features. I'll step on, big drop, boom. That's a pretty decent sized hit there. Oh yeah, the bike is killing it. So the 60-pound spring obviously has no problem with jumps so far. You know, not that those are that big of jumps, but that was about a 15-foot double there, so pretty awesome. It had no problems. So oddly enough, this FastAce Gravitee fork, because of the geometry and the offset of it, it turns better than any of the other forks so far. Like, definitely not a fork that understeers. If anything, it almost oversteers a little bit. And I gotta say, this fork is really good when it comes to keeping the bike playful. You can turn really well with it, which is pretty awesome, because wherever you want the bike to go, it'll go there, and it's doing good about staying in line too. Now through rock gardens like this fork is a little bit on the stiff side. It's not very plush, but I'm staying really high in the travel with it. And like I said, this is the heaviest spring offering that they have, so it's great for jumping. The Charge Cycle Works heavy tune on the previous generation of FastAce was actually, we can get that up to a 65-pound spring, which is even heavier than this one. And people have seemed to like that. But I'm glad that I'm on a fork that's supportive, but it also is handling the trail pretty well. So I can hard charge and be fast and have pretty good traction with it, especially when it comes to churning. It just churns like no other. The front end feels really put together with this fork. However, it is not the most subtle fork in the world. You have to be a really aggressive rider to make it work well for you. Because if you're just kind of casually moving, you definitely feel all the bumps in it. And it's not that it doesn't handle them well, because it does. It's just much more of a matter of being aggressive with this fork that really benefits you. I'm happy that all of the forks that I've been testing recently, none of them feel like very flexy. Unlike forks in years past, you would get so much flex and deflection out of them that it was a major problem. Now this fork isn't the best with chatter so far at this spring rate. You definitely feel all of that through your hands. But when it comes to the high speed, when it comes to being aggressive and being strong, this is the fork that honestly will really benefit you. Especially for its price. So I've got no problem hitting whoops like this wide open and knowing where this fork is going to stay. Hitting jumps, getting the proper rebound out of it. Literally just holding the throttle completely locked open right now. And it stays true. Desert conditions. Now the rebound adjustment on this fork isn't as good as some of the others. I like a fork that you can slow the rebound down like crazy. And this one doesn't really do that, but it does rebound at a good rate, keeping the bike even and keeping traction to the ground. there's definitely a fine line when it comes to compression and rebound and maintaining traction. And I feel like on the compression side of things, this fork works really good, like I said, for being aggressive. But if you're not being aggressive, then it'll beat you up a little bit. That's what's great about multiple fork options on the market at different price points, is you find the one that best suits your riding needs. And I actually really enjoy this fork. I feel like if you're the type of rider that likes a bike that is really playful, and you also really beat up your bike quite a bit, this is going to be one of the better options for that. Because it's really a fork that's just, you know, it's not quite as adjustable as the other ones, but it works well. So if you're the type of guy that doesn't really get out there and adjust your clickers all the time, you just want something that works, this is the fork for that. Because it does. And it keeps the bike playful, so I can really put it where I want to. I can double these jumps. I can get through all these crazy whoop sections and hitting some really big potholes. And it absorbs it and it stays supportive. Great for the high speed.
Today, I'll be testing the KKE Performance 37mm fork. Now this KKE front fork is unlike any other KKE that you see on the market. You traditionally see this fork coming stock on a Sur-Ron Light B. This is nowhere near what that fork is. This fork is a lot thicker, it's a lot stronger, and it's got a little bit more travel than most forks that you see. This fork comes in at 210mm of travel, unlike the traditional 200mm of travel. Most forks are separate fork function, which means you have your compression and rebound dampening in one side and then your spring rate in the other. This fork is much more traditional, like a moto fork. So you've actually got compression, rebound dampening in both sides of the fork. You've got a preload adjustment on this fork, as well as springs in both sides. So it really works in unison. And that's a super nice traditional way about going about creating a fork. That's a super nice traditional way of going about creating a fork. Why venture outside of the realm of what's already been proven over years and years of motocross development? KKE came in with this and just made it super standard. And that's really good to keep it at a nice budget baseline, but it also means that they're sticking to something that you know already works. The spring rate in this fork is 23-pound springs in both legs, which equals 46 pounds, which is pretty standard. You usually get about a 50 or 60-pound spring. 46 pounds I think is going to work really well for trail riding. Another great feature about this fork is it comes with SKF seals. That, in my opinion, is a really big deal because we all know that these little e-motos have got major seal problems and they tend to leak within 5 hours of riding. So having a nice proper seal out of the factory is extremely crucial. That also means that that seal is serviceable, so you can go and pick it up and get it serviced. Now this fork overall looks pretty sleek. It's nice and black all the way through, so it's nice and neutral on the bike. The triple clamps are CNC'd and they're black anodized, so they look really good. However, I do wish that the top clamp had a dual pinch point design. That way we could have just a little bit more rigidity out of this triple clamp system. But they did go and they did beef up the entire fork. Now when it comes to the front axle, this is the traditional KKE front axle that they use across all of their forks. It's got 2 bolts on both sides and it floats in the middle. Now this is not the standard floating axle that you'll typically see on a moto fork, where one side floats within the leg and the other one clamps it down. So I do kind of wish that they would go to that route and make this fork a little bit more subtle on top, like a floating axle traditionally does. However, when it comes to riding the fork, I might not even feel that. So it'll be interesting to see how it actually feels while I'm out there on the course.
Now something that I really actually enjoy about this fork is you can feel within the dampening when you make an adjustment to it. A lot of the other forks, it's really hard to feel that, but this one in particular has got an extremely good rebound adjuster. Like I can really feel the rebound work and slow down when I need it to, which is really nice. Like it's hard to get really good rebound out of a lot of these e-moto forks. So I really like the range of adjustability that this fork has on the rebound side in particular, because I can really keep that front end having traction. You get a lot of progressive braking bumps in a row, having a rebound that works well is really crucial, because you can fine tune it to where the fork doesn't pack up on itself. There's a lot of spots on this trail that have got really fast consecutive chop, and having that good rebound means the fork doesn't pack up on itself. So coming out of corners or hitting certain things, I can have nice traction no matter what I'm doing. And like I said earlier, this is a good spring rate for trail riding because it keeps some plushness. But the dampening works so well that I could go and ride this on some jumps as well and be okay with it. Now, I wouldn't call it like the best free riding fork in the world, but it is really good when it comes to trail riding. I really am enjoying the support that I have out of this fork. Throughout that whole thing, I only used 3/4 of the travel, so I could ultimately back out some of the compression on it, but this trail does have some major G out points, so I'm going to keep it where it's at and see where I end up. Now, I am currently riding on the most lightweight e-moto on the market, which means having a lighter spring rate like this doesn't really feel as light as it would on other bikes. You can truly get a good feel for the dampening and how it's working on a bike like this, but also when it comes to getting more speed, like I am right now, that's when the fork really seems to come alive. Like it's actually working well and holding traction. I think the SKF seals that are on this fork make a really big difference because things feel pretty fluid. Like I said, I could back out some of the compression on this, but for these drops that I'm hitting, I don't really want to do that. It's working well. Like I'm able to take a drop and it feels good. So something about this fork that's a bit of a double-edged sword is you have to carry tools to be able to adjust it on the fly. If you want to adjust a preload to balance out the bike, then you need a 14mm socket, and then you need flat heads for the other adjustments. So that's why I have a bar bag here, so I can adjust things while I'm riding. But like I said, these clickers actually make a difference when you turn them, which is super cool to see. Come on, little light bee, get going! Get going! I've got a small sprocket on this thing to try to increase the top speed for situations like that. It's kind of fun. Let's get into some whoops and see how well this thing performs through those, because that's when you really need the control. So far, I've got it. So throughout the process of getting this fork to break in, something that I did notice was the mid-stroke of the fork was pretty harsh at first. It took some time to get that to truly get worked out. So give the fork a little bit of time, get it feeling good, get it worked in, and then you'll see that it actually feels like a nice progressive stroke throughout it. Whereas in the beginning there was a lot of harshness in the mid-stroke of it. But when it comes to suspension, sometimes you do have to be a little bit patient. Sometimes your first ride on it might not feel as good as you were anticipating, but that's okay. There's a lot of knowledge when it comes to tuning suspension that takes a long time to learn. You know, how compression works in certain situations, how rebound works. You've got a fork with high and low speed compression and sometimes even rebound. You got to learn the differences between that. You got to adapt all of that to your terrain. Then you got to balance that out with the rear shock. It's a process, and that process it's okay. You just got to be patient with it. And a budget fork, you definitely have to be more patient with than you do a premium. But sometimes on a premium fork, you almost have too much adjustability. And it gets hard to know exactly what to do, what direction to go, which is where knowledge really has to come into play. That's the beauty of suspension, is you can make it work for your riding style and situation if you really take the time to make it happen.
Well, now that I'm done testing after a solid week on 3 different sets of suspension, I've developed a pros and cons list that really helps me to determine which sets of suspension will work in different riding scenarios. So let's get started with some of the good about our RFLOXA suspension. I really like the triple clamps. I think they are some of the best triple clamps that I've seen on the market. I really like that it had 228 millimeters of travel. That travel was really nice for the bike. It also balanced out well, and I didn't feel like I was sinking too far into the fork, which was really nice. I found this fork to be decently broad when it came to different scenarios that you could put it into. It worked really good at mid-speed particularly. Low speed it wasn't the best, high speed it wasn't the best, but in those mid-speed scenarios it worked great. Now let's talk about a couple of things on this fork that I don't necessarily like. I'm not the biggest fan of the adjuster knobs. They just look kind of cheap and gimmicky in my opinion, especially when the rest of the fork looks so good itself. And in all reality, this fork really wasn't that much different from the FastAce Gravitee fork. So when it comes down to it, I think that additional $100 you pay really is only in the triple clamps. And that brings me to the FastAce Gravitee fork. Now this fork was a speed demon. This is the heaviest spring rate fork that I was testing. I felt like I could really put this fork through anything. I could go and hit big jumps if I wanted to. I'd go smashing through whoops. Anything high speed, high pace, high risk, this fork really took well. I'm much happier with this fork's overall chassis, especially in comparison to the Gen 1 FastAce. That is still an incredible fork, and when it's tuned, it is great, but this chassis is a lot stronger than that previous one, so it definitely feels less flexy. I was expecting to feel that flex in the triple clamps like I do on the previous generation. However, because they have updated the legs on this fork, those triple clamps still work well, even though they are pretty much the exact same triple clamps as the Gen 1. Another major positive about this fork is that this drop crown does fit it, as well as Warp 9's triple clamp system that widens the fork and drops it an inch as well. Those are huge benefits. It's really nice, especially if you're in the supermoto crowd. Having a wider triple clamp set works great. This drop crown works awesome for 21-inch wheels like we put onto this Ventus 1, so that is a great aspect about this fork, unlike the other ones. Now some of the not so good things about the fork, like I said, this fork was a speed demon, but that means on the opposite end of the spectrum, the low speed was not that good. Whereas the RFLOXA might have been a little bit more broad, this one definitely behaved better at mid to high speed and kind of fell off in the low speed areas. However, I have ridden a 50-pound version of this fork before, and that kind of pulls it back to where the RFLOXA was. It's better in a broad range of scenarios, however not the best for aggressive and high-speed jumping. So once again, it comes down to your kind of riding style to be able to depict and choose what kind of fork you want to put on your bike. Now in terms of the dampening feel, it was pretty much the exact same feeling as the RFLOXA fork was. This fork also has the same high and low speed compression and rebound adjustment. The only difference between this fork is it does not have a preload adjustment. Now on a 60-pound sprung fork, I don't need to add in any additional preload. And truthfully, when you do add preload, it kind of binds things even further and makes the dampening have to work harder. So I tend to try not to have to put preload into a fork unless it's absolutely necessary. And last on the list, but certainly not the least, the KKE 37mm performance fork really surprised me during this. In fact, if I were to take any of those budget forks and put it on my bike right now, straight out of the box with no other adaptations, it would probably be this one. I think the reason it impressed me so much is because of the actual adjustability of this fork. Now I'm not gonna lie, I kinda came into this testing session not expecting this one to be as good as it was. KKE is a good brand, but I've ridden a lot of their suspension and I've never been that impressed, honestly, up until this point. This is one of the better budget forks that I've ever ridden. I'm really stoked that it has SKF seals. I'm really stoked at how adjustable this fork was. I'm really glad I could feel each click of compression and rebound dampening that I made. I'm glad that I could really slow down the rebound on this one if I wanted to, and I was really surprised at how supportive only 46-pound springs were in this fork. I think this fork worked the best for the most broad range of riding. Now, a couple of the negatives about this fork, it definitely took the longest amount of time to break in comparison to the others. This fork is also one of the thinnest inner diameter ones, so if you're a supermoto guy, this fork might not be the best for you. However, it fit the tires that I was running just fine. I was running a Dunlop MX33 7119. Couple of other things about this fork is you have to take tools with you on the trail to be able to adjust it. So that was a little bit of a bummer, but Once I actually got the fork set to where I wanted it to be, I really didn't feel the need to change it. Like I kind of mentioned earlier in the video, I do wish they had a dual pinch clamp design up top. However, the rigidity of this overall triple clamp was still great, worked well on the bike that I was riding. And the last thing is this axle. Not really a big fan of the design of KKE's axles, but everything seemed to work great. Once again, I was really surprised at how well this fork performed overall. Now guys, I am just one rider, but I thought it was a lot of fun to go and compare 3 different budget forks that are all at a very similar price range. And ultimately, if you guys have ridden any of the suspension, I would love to hear your opinion on it as well. Your opinion could very well differ from mine. Everybody that hops on a dirt bike rides a dirt bike differently, and that's completely okay. Suspension is gonna feel very different for every single person, so I definitely wanna hear your opinion. Now, if you guys like this video, it'd be awesome if you left a like, left a comment letting me know what your thoughts are. There's a lot of different suspension options on the market. Ultimately, what I would like to do is a complete suspension shootout, multiple different riders, multiple opinions, the same style of bike, multiple sets of suspension, but that takes a lot of time. So if you guys liked this video and you would like to see that, I can definitely make a push for it, but I need to hear from you. Thank you guys for watching.